Okay, so Jan, thank you very much for agreeing to spend the time here and help me out. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean today, if we can kind of discuss kind of German principles and profession of architecture and the way the system works, that would be fantastic. So I can gain a greater understanding and kind of compare and contrast it to the British system. So if you start with the basics, if you could tell me a bit about yourself, like obviously German born, but then your architecture education and where you went from there.
Yeah, German born, grew up in Germany, in East Germany in particular. Okay. Before the wall came down, then the wall came down, and then I went to high school in Germany. After that, I went to Dresden, to the Technical University there, to study architecture. Okay. In a course starting from 1994 and finished in 1999 with an equivalent qualification as the Masters here.
Okay, fab. Was that a full-time? Did you have any time in industry in between that course, or was it full-time?
No, it was a full-time. It was a full-time course, but it did require 2 stints. One within the first 2 years of working 12 weeks in a construction company. Okay. And then another 12-week stint in an architectural office prior to being able to sit your exams. Okay, fab.
So after that period, that tenure at university, were you fully qualified as an architect?
No, you're not fully qualified, and that's where you are a Part 2 equivalent.
Okay.
In Germany, and then state specific, where I then worked, is a 2-year period in which you further qualify and finally get your registration.
Okay, fab. Okay, that's really interesting. And how long have you been qualified as an architect now?
Since 2001.
Okay,
so that's 14 years by now.
Fab. And have you, obviously you're working in London now, but whereabouts in the world have you practiced? I imagine you started your career in Germany?
Yes, I started my career in Germany. I spent 5.5 years in Germany, working in an architectural office. Okay. Then I moved across the world to New Zealand.
Oh, fab.
Spent 12 months in New Zealand and worked 8 of them in an architectural practice in New Zealand. Okay. And moved to London after that.
Oh, so you've seen a wide range of professions and also the way they kind of work, and I imagine it's pretty different stuff in New Zealand compared to the German and the kind of European systems. I imagine they're fairly different.
They're actually not that different. Okay. Architecture generally is a fairly universal profession. Yeah. There are variations between countries. Yeah. But they are very specific in certain areas. New Zealand, for example, is a very earthquake-prone country. Yeah. And every building you touch to refurbish or you build new has to have earthquake reinforcement built into it. That was quite an interesting learning curve. Completely. And it's also New Zealand is very based on timber construction, so most of domestic construction is timber construction, whilst in Germany most of it is, at least used to be, solid wall construction.
Oh, so you've seen like that kind of contrast in style as well as the kind of different kind of the way the methods, the way they
it's different methods, different details.
Oh, fun. Okay, amazing. I'm very envious. Okay, so you obviously worked in different countries. Have you been registered in all of the countries as an architect in that country when you've been working there?
I have not been registered in New Zealand because that is as New Zealand, all different countries have their different registration process. Mm-hmm. And there is, in the European Union, there's a recognition agreement between all the registration bodies. Yep. Therefore, you can transfer your registration across without actually having to resit your exams and your qualifications. Okay. In New Zealand, that didn't recognise my German registration. Oh, so really? I would have needed to go through an at least 2-year process of sitting at the Part 3 equivalent.
Oh gosh, and is that still the case, do you know?
It still is the case.
Really?
But with the UK registration, you can actually register in New Zealand.
Really?
Because the system is very, very similar to the UK.
Okay, okay. That's very interesting.
Both in registration process and in building regs as well.
Okay. And I mean, considering that the kind of, even though the systems in the UK and Germany are different, like they're still kind of the leading architectural markets within Europe, it's quite odd that a country kind of wouldn't accept the German qualifications.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, it's interesting. So, specifically talking about Germany, you are obviously now registered with the ARB.
Yes.
And the RIBA?
And the RIBA.
Okay, and in Germany you've been registered previously for how long?
I've kept my German registration until last year. So
okay.
I had a full registration for about 14 years in Germany.
Ah, okay. And who was that? Was that with any body? Was it a professional body, or was it the regulatory body? Well, I assume you needed a regulatory body.
It is the regulatory body which allows you to carry the title architect.
Okay.
And issues you with your registration number, which is essential to actually submit planning applications.
Okay, and that regulatory body, what can you tell me about that regulatory body? Is it similar to the ARB in the UK, or obviously I know the makeup of Germany being a republic and a federation has the states, so I'm imagining it's probably a bit more complicated than the ARB.
It is slightly more complicated, but you could split Germany into 16 different countries.
Okay. Yeah.
And then they're very similar to the UK, so they've got the regulatory body, which is state specific.
Yeah.
But the overall aim of all of them in all the federation are to protect the title architect.
Okay.
And that also means that they're looking after your professional development.
Yes.
So, and they will also take steps against architects who are misusing the title or going against the code of conduct.
Okay, and does it vary from state to state? Okay, in the process of registering, is it quite similar, or I imagine there's slight different variations?
As far as I know, they are fairly similar.
Okay. They
have a certain period of time, so in my state, in Brandenburg, it's a two-year process of professional development within an architectural practice.
Okay.
You have to sit a number of lectures, which is given if you've ticked all these boxes.
Yeah.
Then you are allowed to actually submit your application for your registration.
Okay.
What your application has to comprise of is all the certificates for all the courses you've done, and a summary of the work you've done, the stages you've worked on.
Okay.
And all of that has then to be signed by your supervising architect in the office.
Oh, I see.
So it has to be signed by a registered architect.
Okay.
Who's been supervising you through the minimum of 2 years.
Yeah. So it's quite similar to the British PEDR system in the sense that you kind of record your diary, you kind of state what kind of stages you're at. Okay, so it's you almost have a mentor that kind of takes you through, and the guy in your practice who will kind of show you the ropes and help you out when you're struggling, like I am at the moment.
You have an experienced architect who takes the Part 2 qualified student on.
Yes.
To move them to a Part 3.
Okay.
Fully qualified architect.
Yeah, that's a difficult task, isn't it? Okay, so I mean, this kind of state system is quite interesting. Is there a body that sits above I mean, obviously they all exist and work together. Is there a governing body that sits above them that kind of speaks for everyone internationally and on like a national level?
Not as a regulatory body.
Okay.
There's a body which sits above that, which is the Bundesarchitektenkammer, which is the Chamber of Architects for the Federation.
Okay.
But they don't have any regulatory powers to the states.
Okay.
That's just the way the Federation works.
Okay.
So the states they give a guidance to all the states. So you have a very a cohesive approach to all of it.
Okay.
And then each individual state will, usually they take the recommendation and implement it in their state and do small variations depending on what the needs are for the architects in the state. That is sort of you could almost look at this as if you had an ARB in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Okay,
and then
so it's kind of regional.
Then you had another overarching body
that kind of controlled those.
Which didn't control, which advises them in a way.
Okay. That's an interesting model. I wonder how that would work. I mean, I can imagine maybe even if you were to divide that more to slight regions in England. So you have like London as its own kind of. Okay, that's an interesting thought. I could.
It's all how the legal system works in Germany and how the federation works and who is responsible for what within the federation.
Okay. And you mentioned something just previously about how the regulatory bodies protect the name of architect. I mean, ARB does a similar thing, but I mean, is there anything more in the German system that protects like function of the architect? I mean, there's nothing at the moment in the UK that there is anything here that protects the function of architects, but in Germany.
Well, there are specific roles only an architect can carry out in Germany. For example, a submission of a planning application can only be submitted if it's signed by a registered architect.
Okay.
Unless it's a smaller type of building, but that's the exception.
Okay.
So with your registration, you get a stamp and a number.
Yeah.
And each individual drawing's been stamped and signed by the architect before you can actually submit it for planning.
Oh, okay. So it means, do planners exist in Germany? Do you have that kind of middleman, or is it mainly the architect's duty to do that?
They didn't when I was working there.
Okay.
The architects were the planners, and some architects were specialising in almost taking on the planning role if you get in larger projects.
Yes.
But they're all architects, and they'll then start specialising into certain parts of architecture.
Oh, okay.
But only in very large companies and in very large projects.
That's very interesting, because it's where in the UK system now the role of the architects has been very diluted by more professionals coming in. Architects almost kind of not unwilling to perform certain tasks that they're trained for, but
I think architects have given some of them up quite freely and quite happily, which is a bit unfortunate.
Yeah, completely. And I think the British profession as a whole now, I think, is kind of not paying the price for it, but is feeling the kind of the strain at the moment in terms of like the limited opportunities for work.
I think paying the price for it is the right expression for it.
Okay. No, gotcha. So I mean, in Germany, in the UK, we have the ARB and also the RIBA, so the professional body. In Germany, do you have again any such thing? So you have the two kind of bodies working together?
We haven't.
Okay.
In that sense.
Okay.
But we've got a second body.
Right.
Which is the BDA.
Cool.
Bund Deutscher Architekten.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you to spell that for me.
Right,
actually, I'll get you to write it down for me later.
I'll write it down for you later. But that is more of an organisation of architects.
Okay.
Who to actually promote the profession in a way, protect the profession, but they have no regulatory powers.
Okay.
As such.
Okay.
It's almost like a bit of a club which you are invited to become a member.
So you almost have to prove your worth and your skills within the architectural profession to then become a member.
Yeah.
Okay, so I imagine the RIBA has got 44,000 members, and I don't think there's any kind of. I think anyone can be a member if you're there's different levels of membership. Whereas with the BDA, you can only become a member if you get invited to be a member.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, does that, I imagine in some sense, if you have that kind of BDA connection, it's good for the workplace in the sense of like,
yes, I guess
you've
so.
got that renowned name next to your name as well. I imagine it probably helps business.
It probably does help business.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that it is. I'm sure it's beneficial for architects.
Yeah.
And it's beneficial for the public face of architecture.
Okay, completely.
But it's probably not overly beneficial to most of the architects practicing in Germany.
Okay, yeah, no, fair enough. I think, again, internationally, it's probably something like the RIBA, those kind of letters stand out and people kind of see that and then recognise it as well.
Yes.
Okay, I understand. I got you there. So, in terms of the education within Germany, obviously I'm studying education now, and I can tell that it's really important for a young architectural professional like myself. For my development, it's kind of key. Like, how do the options work in Germany? Is there one route, or can you take select routes? And is it university based or college based? I mean, obviously in the UK we have a 7-year, 8-year course that we have to do and sit part 1, 2 and 3. But in Germany, how does it work?
Times have changed since I went to university.
Okay.
When I went to university, you had 2 different routes you could go down.
Right.
One route was the university route, and one was more of the technical college route, I would say.
Yeah.
As a comparison, it's actually Fachhochschule, but I'm not sure how that sits directly in comparison to the technical college.
Okay.
The university route was a 5-year period of university study.
Yep.
As your shortest period, you could stretch it out.
Yes, okay.
If you wanted, but you had a 5-year education process.
Okay.
To your Part 2 equivalent.
Right.
And the college route was a 4-year route.
Oh, so slightly shorter.
Slightly shorter. It also had, you have the 2 letters FH always behind it as part of your qualification. So, one of the big differences of architecture education in Germany, at least 15 years ago, was that architecture is an engineering profession in Germany. Mm-hmm. So the qualification you gained at the end of your studies was you became an engineer of architecture.
Mm. Okay, I've heard the term the German engineering, and obviously without knowing, I mean, I imagine that's engineering based, but now you said that, I imagine that's obviously probably connected with the high quality of work that German architects
It is connected with the overall, the role of the architect includes so much more than only the design process. Yeah. It includes all the technical knowledge. It includes to know what materials are made of. Okay. Yeah. It includes a base knowledge of structural education. Okay. It includes a base knowledge of building physics. Yes. All of this was taught at university, so you had that the whole package together was a bit, I'd say, a bit more rounded in comparison to what I've noticed in the UK. Yeah, completely. Whilst in the UK it's more design driven. Yes. In Germany, at least in the technical universities and most universities, it's more of an all-round process. Okay, so would you say more of a traditional education in the sense of you look at the role of the architect in the past, where I think you have a term in Germany, is it the master builder that they say? So this kind of the architect kind of controls the whole process and should know a little bit about every kind of sector of and one of the sayings is an engineer knows everything about something, and the architect knows a little bit about everything. Okay. And interesting. In a way, architecture could be seen as an orchestrating profession. Yes. It's holding all the strings and making sure that everything works together. Okay. So you need to have an understanding of each profession's speciality. Yeah. To then combine them together. Okay, and does that include everything
from an architect, do they have to do with the likes of costs? I mean, in the UK we have the idea of like quantity surveyors and other kind of surveyors that fit into the process. Do they exist in Germany, or is it again, does the architect lead on that front?
The architect is responsible for the costs.
Okay.
For the costings.
Wow. Yes. Okay, so another skill that we don't use at all in the UK. Really.
So part of the education and the process of becoming a qualified architect is to prove that you've actually done costings throughout a project process.
Okay.
And there are certain stages within the project where you have to supply a costing.
Okay.
And without a change of brief, if those costings are out by a certain percentage, then you're liable for that.
Really?
As the architect.
Oh gosh. I imagine that's probably over the years caught out quite a few people. Or
no,
I suppose if you've been educated in that way, you've kind of, you know the train of thought, you know how to go about doing it.
Yes, in a way it puts you into a position where your design process isn't only driven by paper and a pencil.
Yeah.
It's also driven by an awareness of how much things cost.
I see. Oh no, that's very interesting.
So it is quite a holistic profession, and it's the project management. The jobs I used to do in Germany did include me being the client representative, the project manager, the cost consultant, the...
Okay, so Jan, thank you very much for agreeing to spend the time here and help me out. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean... Okay, so Jan, thank you very much for agreeing to spend the time here and help me out. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, today if we can kind of discuss kind of German principles and profession.
Negotiated that, and you took the responsibility to advise the client to then make the decision, which in the UK is the project manager and the QS together doing that.
So in the sense, in Germany, the architect is invaluable to the client.
At least we used to be.
Yes. Okay. But I mean, still, even more so than in the UK, where now the quantity surveyor and the project manager are almost the client's best friends, because they're the people who are controlling costs and making sure it stays on route.
They're the people the client considers most valuable to him.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Again, that's somewhere in the UK where we've kind of drifted away. The whole profession of project management has almost been created by us, in a sense, our profession, because we didn't really want to knuckle down and do the planning of the construction and this, that and the other, whereas now they seem to be flourishing from it.
But in a way it's also, we've also lost the holistic view on things, because we're not the cost consultant anymore.
Yeah.
So we design something, the cost consultant costs it, and if it doesn't fit, then we amend it.
Yeah.
In the holistic process of costing it yourself, you are aware of what your budget is going to be, and how much you can actually spend, and then you look at your budget, and then you be creative within the budget.
Okay, yeah. No, it makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? And again, it's a shame that our profession's kind of stepped away from that outlook. Because traditionally in Britain, we kind of did once follow that kind of view of things.
So now we're totally in the hands of the QSs.
Completely. So talking about the construction side of things, obviously in the UK we have different forms of kind of construction contracts. So the traditional, which is again probably becoming a lot less common, because I think these days again it's controlled by clients and money, and design and build is coming in a lot in our industry now and kind of kicking forward. And obviously you have bespoke kind of forms of contract as well. But in Germany, do you have, I imagine you probably have a couple, what are the kind of main versions? Do you have design and build? Do you have traditional?
I think they're pretty similar. From my experience working in Germany, the traditional was still the one most people used.
Okay.
But the design and build obviously gives the client cost certainty.
Yeah.
And the risk is taken by the contractor.
Yeah. So I mean, in Germany, when you hear of, like you said earlier, the architect is responsible for pretty much everything. Is the direct point of contact. Is there a type of, would you say a traditional contract?
That's traditional.
Okay.
So they're there are even other types of contracts where your building contract is you've got design and build in a way. You still have the architect.
Mm-hmm.
You also have, it's difficult to describe it. It's a contract the client does with the architect, or basically gets a main designer.
Okay.
What that main designer is responsible for all the sub-consultants as well. So there's one point of contact for the client.
Oh, I see.
And he comes to you and says, you design me a building.
And then you deliver it.
And then you deliver it.
Okay. So again, that's another, so you're not only dealing with costs, you're not only dealing with the management of construction, you're almost kind of employing and recommending contractors.
Yeah, it's what's fairly common in architecture, not necessarily contractor, but consultants such as structural engineers, M&E engineers. All of these are under the umbrella of the architect.
Wow.
So the client instructs an architect to deliver a design, and then the architect instructs the structural engineer, the M&E engineer, and all the consultants they need.
It seems that system seems so far away from where we are in the UK at the moment. I mean, again,
well, in a way, it's in the UK, architects have de-risked their job.
Yes. Yeah, it's kind of allocation of risk.
But also by de-risking your job,
you're
losing control.
Yes.
Or no, you're not losing control. You're giving up control.
Yeah.
So, whilst for a German architect, if he's got a structural engineer who sends him an invoice, but the architect hasn't been paid by the by the client, the architect still needs to pay the sub-consultant.
Yes, I see.
So that's the risk.
Okay, so risky business, but again, through education they've been trained well. Architects kind of know the way about things, and they know how to kind of work with the industry and the market. I imagine they're pretty successful and pretty good at their jobs.
Yes, of course we are.
German efficiency right there. Okay, so I mean, in terms of architects getting paid, I imagine because there is quite a lot of risk involved in their process, there's a lot of responsibility and liability, I imagine they're paid quite well. I mean, how do they get paid in Germany?
I'm not sure whether they get paid very well.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
It's not very different in terms of the percentages of what you get in the UK.
Okay.
However, it's regulated.
Right.
In Germany.
Okay.
In Germany exists a fee schedule.
Right.
Which is legally binding.
Legally binding, is it?
Yes.
Okay, so not even a recommendation.
It's not a recommendation.
Ah.
This, as a professional who offers services in the building industry, such as architects, structural engineers, landscape architects, those kind of people, they are all bound to that document.
Oh, I see.
And within that document you have a fee scale, which depends on the construction cost.
Okay.
So your fees are based on the construction cost.
Yeah.
And then within that scale there are different categories depending on the complexity of the job.
Oh, I see.
Which you need to agree with your client which band you're falling under.
Okay, I imagine that's where the negotiation happens. I imagine
that's where the negotiation happens.
Okay.
And then, in the traditional sense of an architect, is whatever the final construction cost is what your fee will be based on.
Right. Okay. So that's similar on the scale, so you literally mark it up on the scale, you look at the costs, which the architect has worked out himself.
Yes, but in a way now there comes the interesting thing into this, because the architect is also responsible for the costs, so there's a bit of certainty for the client in it, that the architect doesn't try and inflate the construction costs to get more fees.
Okay.
But then if you inflate that and you can't prove it's a change you haven't had any input on, then you're liable for the additional costs in your costs plan.
So in a way it's almost very fair in the sense
in a way
that the architects have to be fair, they can't push the limits because
Yes.
otherwise they're going to pay their price in the long run.
And the reason for that fee schedule is that the architects are meant to compete on the quality of design and not on the fee.
Okay. So again, it's the idea that the German quality,
Yes.
high quality and efficient design.
Well, it's generally to protect quality of building.
Okay. Yeah.
And
it's something that we lack in the UK, isn't it? It's you have people competing for fees and for works and not necessarily charging the right money and then sacrificing the quality of the work.
Yes. If you build a building in Germany, you have at the end a construction cost, and whoever is your architect gets paid the same amount of money.
Okay. Completely.
Well, that's the theory. There are exceptions to it, but that becomes very complex.
So if architects are competing on quality, how do the kind of procurement processes work? Is the idea of competing for work? I mean, obviously in the UK we very much have a kind of, I say materialistic, but a name, a brand of an architect, with Foster's or Grimshaw's, one of the big, categorised architects. A lot of clients go for the name.
You do have that in Germany as well.
Okay.
And that's where the competition comes in.
Yeah.
That's where you, as the architect, or as an owner of an architect's firm, have to decide what you want to do. Whether you want to change your office into a brand, and use that as a driver for new clients and your work.
Would you say that firms compete publicly for like public projects or mainly private projects? I mean,
well, every public project in Germany, at least in the European Union, above a certain amount of money, which is fairly low, has to be made into a European-wide competition.
Okay.
So it's in that way it's quite difficult for the German Chamber of Architects to protect their German architects. Yes. Because you have to go European-wide.
Okay. Although, in order to build a building in one of the German states, I imagine a lot of international firms will see it as a burden to then have to liaise with the chamber of that certain state where the project is located.
Yes, because you actually have to. Where were we?
So you have to. I forgot. I'm trying to thought now. Oh, we're talking about where the international architect has to liaise with the German state.
Yes, well, an international architect is allowed, if it's a European architect, he is allowed to work in Germany, but he needs to register with the governing body, which is the Chamber of Architects in the local state.
So there is that protection there.
There's a protection there, but it's just, here it isn't the same, because here the planner submits the planning application. You don't actually have to be a registered architect to submit a planning application in the UK.
Okay, so again...
In Germany it protects it, but the protection comes from the quality... It's... The reason the registration has to... Well, the architect who submits the planning application has to be registered in Germany, is so the governing body of architecture can protect the quality of architecture and the architects as well.
I see. Okay. So, I imagine that system almost protects local architects as well, in the sense that if there is an international firm that comes in, would they liaise with local architects to then maybe work alongside them, or they could be the local architects? They
can do it either way. They can do it by themselves. Yeah. But German building regs are very complicated. Yeah. We Germans know how to write a legal document and make a law. I think we've written 85% of the world's documents on these.
Right, okay, I see.
So local knowledge is quite important. Yes. And it helps. It's not essential. But as a registered architect within the European Union, you can set up a company in Germany, register there, and then you are allowed to submit that.
Okay. So to wrap things up, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. But the last couple of points I'm going to ask you about is kind of taking your experience from both the UK and Germany. First of all, where do you prefer working? It's a kind of a silly question. Obviously, times change, but from your experience in Germany and your experience in London and in the UK, which system do you find more efficient for us as a profession?
Well, for the protection of the profession, I would have to say it's the German system. However, I wouldn't say that I prefer the German system to the UK system. I think both have advantages and disadvantages.
Okay. And what would you say are the key, if the UK system were to take, learn lessons and draw upon things within the German system, what would be the standout features and aspects of the German profession that the UK should really take note of? For example, I know we in the UK once did have a fee schedule.
Yes, I think that's the main point in the UK is competing on fees which you can't actually survive on.
Yeah.
It's driving a profession somewhere where it's going to collapse. Mm-hmm. The other problem the UK has is that the architects don't actually have a very good reputation for a number of reasons which are understandable.
Mm-hmm.
But by not being able to earn sufficient fees,
there's got to be give somewhere.
You're sort of pigeonholed into creating. Well, you also lost the control over the project.
Yes.
You can find your corner through the project, and depending on your relationships with the client, with the project managers, and everyone else, that's where you can exert the pressure and look to achieve the quality.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in design and build processes and in a money-driven environment, the arguments usually lie on the side of the contractor or the QS in terms of financial ones.
Yeah, completely. I see. It's
there's also a bit of a problem with the planning system generally
within the UK.
In the UK,
yeah,
which is a bit annoying and not very understandable. Well, I can't remember who said that. Someone said that London is a very chaotic place to work in.
Yes.
In terms of it's got no strategy, no overarching master plan for all of London.
Okay.
Which also creates very interesting pockets.
Yes.
And very interesting ways of working. But I think the downsides are a bit bigger.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, honestly, I can't thank you enough for your time.
You're welcome.
Very much appreciated.
Anytime.
And I think from our discussion here, I'm looking forward to pushing on with the study and researching further. And it looks interesting, doesn't it? I think there's certainly a hell of a lot of things that the UK can learn from Germany, and vice versa, maybe, like the flexibility, yes. And the I can almost see some people say the German market could be restricted by their strict standards and what have you.
It is, and some of the international architects have pulled out of Germany because of the complexity of the legal system.
Okay, well again, that's something I'm going to research. Any names in particular I should look at?
I think, was it John Lobal, I thought.
Oh really? Pulled out of Germany altogether?
I think I've seen I've been in a lecture where I think it was him, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
Where he said he had to withdraw from Germany because it became way too complex.
Oh, that's
and
very
too restrictive.
Yes, completely. Thank you ever so much for your time, Jan. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.